Hey, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be talking about someone that is considered to be a medical wonder by the name of Phineas Gage. Now, this guy lived back in the 1800s, 1848, I think this event was. Back then, we didn't know too much about the human brain, how it worked, what it did, what parts did what, until this guy had a horrible accident. And as unfortunate as it was, we learned a lot about how the brain works from this accident. So let's jump into these notes and take a look at it. All right, so Phineas Gage, the medical wonder. This gentleman worked on the railroad. He was what we call a foreman, the guy in charge of all of these guys who were doing all the work. And he would actually do some work himself. Like I said, there was an accident that resulted in us learning a little bit about how the brain works. So let's talk about this guy. He was about 25 years old when he was working on the railroad as a foreman, meaning he was in charge of all of the other workers, telling them what to do, where to go, and how to do it, that sort of thing. Uh, and he accidentally set off an explosion. Whoops. In the process, a 3 foot long steel rod, actually, I believe it was iron. I may have wrote that wrong, blasted completely through his skull. Yeah, like imagine a metal yardstick going through your head. That is what we're talking about here. It entered through the cheek and the left eye, actually popping his left eye out. Ugh. And going out the top. And this is the newspaper clipping from the very next day. And I know you can't really read it. I'll try my best to read it for you. It says, horrible accident. As Phineas P. Gage, a foreman on the railroad in Cavendish, was yesterday engaged in Lamkia, I think is the location, for a blast. Uh, the powder exploded, carrying an iron instrument through his head, an inch and a fourth in circumference and 3 feet 8 inches in length, so longer than a yardstick, when he was, which he was using at the time. The iron entered the side of his face, shattering the upper jaw and passing the back of the left eye and out the top of his head. The most singular circumstance connected with this melancholy affair is that he was alive at 2 o'clock this afternoon in full possession of his reason and free from pain. That's right. A metal pole went through his brain, and he not only survived, but he was fully conscious, aware of everything, and claimed to not be in pain, which is absolutely weird. So when this happened, it said that he fell to the ground and then stood right back up again. Metal pole through the head, falls over, gets right back up. And he was able to talk with the doctor while the doctor inserted his fingers into the holes that the rod drilled in Gage's skull, like being able to poke his brain. Now, there were two doctors to take a look at this guy today, Harlow and Williams. The two physicians to see Gage on the day of the accident said that the tampering iron had emerged at the junction of the coronal and sagittal sutures in the midline. You don't know what those words mean. What that means is right about here. If this is the top of his skull, is the actual top of his skull, by the way. Uh, so this is the front, this is the back. His ear would be over here someplace, right? And it busted out right through this hole. This piece of bone was put back afterwards. You see, they weren't able to fully find all the pieces and put them back, but yeah, they managed to put some of the bone back and heal some of it a bit. In 1982, remember this was 1848 this happened. In 1982, they got the skull again. Now that we had computers to actually do things, and they scanned they scanned the skull, and a dark spot to the right here shows where the rod would have been. And then in 1994, they had even better computers. This is around the time Jurassic Park came out for reference. And they recreated what would have happened. And they can see going through the jaw, popping out his left eye, and taking a chunk of brain and popping out his skull. This is the part they were able to put back, by the way. So a big chunk of his brain gone. I believe it was said to be about the size of a teacup. And this is the actual iron, 3 foot 8 inches long. This is the bar that shot through the head of Mr. Phineas P. Gage at Cavendish, Vermont, September 14th, 1848. He fully recovered from the injury and deposited this bar in the Museum of Medical College at Harvard University. So you could actually go there. You could go to Harvard right now and see this bar on display. So kind of messed up. Imagine this going through your head and surviving. However, there were a couple changes in this poor guy. He was missing his left eye. That's a big change. Otherwise, physically fit. But he was considered to be a changed man afterwards. Before, he was well liked, hardworking. He was in charge, he was a foreman. Afterwards, he had turned into a profane, ill tempered, and indecisive fellow. That means he started cursing a lot, he was angry a lot, and he wasn't able to make decisions, which is kind of tough when you're the guy in charge. He was never again able to hold a railroad job because you can't do your job, you can't keep your job. So that was kind of a problem. He died 12 years later after experiencing a series of epileptic seizures. We think that had something to do with a metal bar going through his brain. Dr. Harlow studied Gage's skull. I can't say that wrong. Dr. Harlow studied Gage's skull, announced his belief that the rod had damaged areas of the frontal lobe of the brain. And at this point, he hypothesized those frontal lobes, are responsible for the severe personality change experienced by Gage as a result of the accident. Now, you guys, what you need to understand is we didn't know this back then. People didn't understand really how the brain worked. In fact, they had a whole bunch of misconceptions and fake pseudoscience and wrong ideas about all this stuff. Like, they actually believed that you could look at the shape of your skull and determine whether you were good or evil. They didn't know anything. But now they have evidence. The frontal lobes of this guy's brain were damaged and his personality changed. Therefore, he hypothesizes that the frontal lobes handle your personality. Now, this is a highly criticized because, it's a one-time deal. Science doesn't really care about one moment. We need to do things over and over and over and over again. If it happens every single time, then it's a good study. This was a one-time event because we're not going to recreate this. It would be cool, but horrible. But it is very famous because, like I said, it was kind of cool, but also very informative. Discussions on whether behavior could be mapped to particular areas of the brain became a very popular thing to talk about after this. Instead of having one solid brain doing everything, it was separated into chunks of the brain, deciding different parts of your personality, different parts of body functions, different parts of everything, different part of the brain for a different purpose. In 1994, University of Iowa made a computer image, that's the one I showed you, and agreed with Harlow that the rod passed through the ventromedial region of the underside of the frontal lobes. That, again, a lot of words you didn't understand. What that means is it destroyed a chunk of the frontal lobes, an area we now know to be connected with an individual's personality. We found other ways of studying it. We didn't actually damage people's brains. I take that back. We'll probably talk about lobotomies later. And yes, a lot of doctors did destroy people's brains for the study, but we found better ways of doing it too, mapping it with electrical currents and things like that, mapping where different parts of your brain light up with MRIs and that kind of thing. And that's where we're going to stop talking about this today. Tomorrow, we will jump into the notes and we will start talking about what we actually do know about the brain. But for now, there is a question that I would like you to answer.